I'm going to be introducing you in this PowerPoint to cognitive affective social state and the neural regions that are implicated in CAS, cognitive affective social state, and a neuro-ecological model of cognition. Social cognition and mental states. An area of social cognition concerns the study of the relationship between the environment and the mental states of the individuals within it. We might refer to this as human neuro-ecology. I'm going to be introducing you to a neural-appy model of such neuro-ecology called Cognitive Affective Social State, or CAS state for short. And I'm going to be describing the neural functions that conceptually are fulfilled by CAS and relate them to circuits or neural bases of the brain known to be involved in such functions. Okay, so Cognitive Affective Social State, or CAS state, is a conceptual proposal about the neural task of learning. How, in this diagram here, data A from the environment is incorporated into the mental data set 1, and by which data set 1 changes to data set 2. Now, CAS state concerns the incorporation of all data, whether it's cognitive or affective or social data, and it concerns the interrelated neural regions involved in that process. So the interrelated neural regions involved in the process of incorporating cognitive data about things, or affective, somatic data about feelings, or sociolinguistic data about people. That's why CAS state is called Cognitive Affective Social State. Now, this is a very important suggestion here. Cognitive affective social data is multi-structural. For example, when you read a novel, the data may be offered to you in the structures of ideas, for example, or of human feelings that will evoke your human feelings, in the structure of numbers and figures, in the structure of narrative plots or described events. Now, structure of data is not the same as kind of data. By kind of data, we mean the 5 sense data: visual data, auditory data, tactile data, and such like. Structural data is not what we mean kind of data is not what we mean when we talk about structure of data. Now, the multi-structural nature of data presents the brain with a challenge. Your brain has to integrate the external data that it is processing with your existing internal mental data structures in order to retain it, to sense make, and to use it. So a process of integration between an external data set and your existing internal mental data structures has to take place. So, for example, let's look at this as a challenge. Imagine that you are an English student and you happen to be attending a lecture on Cognitive Affective Social State, CAS. Now, the lecturer is writing on the board, and the data structure of the lecture over here is mainly conceptual ideas, data, statistical evidence, and in the form of detached logic. So lots of abstract structure, lots of numerical structure here. But you, as an English student over here, listening hard, well, your brain is familiar with data structure in the form of narratives and concrete events. In order for you to learn, your brain has to integrate data that is coming to you, that's available to you in this lecture, that is coming to you in a structure that is different from the structure of data that is mainly retained in your internal data set, in your memory, in your sense-making processes. In other words, your internal data structure is unfamiliar with the external data structure that you are trying to process. Now, this is much the same challenge that's faced, we use an analogy, by internet software applications. This is quite a helpful way of thinking about the mental challenge involved that we're talking about here. So applications such as Instagram or Twitter or Blogger or Facebook may often hold their data in a different structure to another application. And yet, they have to share their data with each other. So Instagram has to share its data with Blogger or with Facebook. When I say I want to upload my Instagram picture directly to my blog account, that is a challenge because Instagram stores its data in a different structure to Blogger. Now, Internet applications solve this data structure problem via what's called an Application Programming Interface, or API. Now, the API sits between Instagram, in this instance, and Blogger, two different data sets. The Instagram data set structured in one way, and the Blogger data set structured in another way. And the API sits between the two and pulls data from one data set in a structure that the API, can accept via a request and receipt execution sequence, and then it pushes that data into the second data set, in this case Blogger, in a structure that Blogger, will accept through a determine and deliver sequence. So the API is a data integrator piece of software that is separate from Instagram and separate from Blogger, that sits between the two, the different data sets, and enables them to transfer data from one to the other. Now here's the proposal. Might it be that circuits of the brain associated with executive functions serve as a neural API? And this neural API in this proposal functions to translate external data which comes in one structure into the structure of the internal data set, in other words, the memory. That's our proposal, and that's our proposal about cognitive affective social state. If that was the case, what neural activities would this neural API involve? And secondly, what neural circuits or regions of the brain might be implicated in these activities? Those are the two questions which we're going to ask ourselves now. What neural activities would this involve? And then what circuits and regions of the brain might be implicated in these activities? Well, the first neural activity that this is going to involve is what we might call strain management. In other words, coping with suboptimal fit. What we might call suboptimal fit. Now, suboptimal fit is when the data structure of the external environment does not fit the data structure of the internal memory. There isn't a fit there, and this creates strain, mental strain. Now, cognitive affective social state implicates circuits involved in strain management. In this case, our poor English student who is sitting in the CAS lecture struggling to understand ideas which are coming in a very different structure to the one that they are used to. Now, we know that the anterior cingulate cortex is involved in activities related to effortful performance, for example, in error detection and the management of conflict and of responding to conflicting stimuli. It's involved in the management of inhibiting neural stimuli, to pay attention to a single stimulus, and heavily implicated in ADHD studies. So it would seem likely that the anterior cingulate cortex is a region of the brain which is implicated in this neural API function that we're proposing, particularly around the need to manage strain when there is a suboptimal fit between the external data structure and your internal data structure, like our English student in our CAS lecture. We also know that the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is involved in the consciousness of frustration. so this region down here, and quite possibly too that the cortex here and cortical arousal circuits, which are involved in valence, there's evidence that that affects attentional control. So a number of different areas of the brain may be involved in what we might call strain management. Secondly, the task of this neural appy may involve what we might call theory of mind, or TOM, attentional bias motivating. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by TOM, attentional bias motivating, is the inferring of the relative importance of investing energy and attention and effort upon a particular component of the external data set, be that a person or a source of stimulation. So this is about that mental choice to invest attention and effort, to bias attention, and the motivation to bias attention upon a particular component, a person, of the external data set. Now, this is an important component of the proposal of Cognitive Affective Social State, and it implicates regions of the brain involved in mentalizing, in theory of mind processes. Now, theory of mind processes might be involved in ascribing superior and inferior status to other people's mental states. So, for example, if I ascribe to the mental state of the lecturer a superior status, as these audience members clearly do, they're enthralled by the lecturer, they're ascribing him a superior mental state, they're mentalizing about his mental state as superior to theirs. Perhaps that's involved in them consciously, in this case, or perhaps unconsciously, biasing attention towards what he's saying. And this would be involved in the student adopting a more open posture to learning new ideas from this lecturer. Conversely, if they inferred and ascribed an inferior mental state to him, to their own, that might bias them to pay less attention and less effort involved in the learning process, which might then lead to a more closed posture to learning from his ideas. Now, we know from studies that the temporoparietal junction, TPJ, is implicated in representing mental state and in the mentalizing process, and in recognizing our agency and what we have agency over, what we don't have agency over, and in the ability to discriminate between other people's actions and our own. And so it looks likely that TPJ is a region of the brain involved in ascribing status to other people's mental state in that mentalizing process. And we also know that the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC, and precuneus is also involved in mentalizing processes. So, CAS, as a proposal of Cognitive Affective Social State, paying attention to the different structures of data that comes to us, may well implicate theory of mind regions of the brain. Thirdly, CAS may implicate the governing of the switching of attention between internal thought and external stimuli, what we might call internal-external perception switching. So this model that we're working with it suggests that we are going to need to be able to account for the ability to switch from external focus, for example, noticing events externally, changing events, and executing responsive actions, to internal focus, mentalizing, incorporating new complex ideas, managing internal affective state, preparing, rehearsing actions, etc. So, for example, in our lecture, as our English student moves from attending to the PowerPoint and the lecturer and to that external cue, to processing and internally reflecting upon and integrating the ideas, the new ideas that they are learning in this lecture. And work done by Burgess et al. In 2005 implicated the rostral prefrontal cortex as a gateway switch, involved in biasing the relative influence of stimulus-orientated or stimulus-independent thought. In other words, moving attention to stimulus-orientated thought, i.e. paying attention outside us, to the external environment, or to diverting attention to stimulus-independent thought, as they explained it, i.e. paying attention to thought that is internal to us. And so we would conceptualize that rostral prefrontal cortex is involved in this proposal of cognitive affective state, the ability to switch between paying attention externally and internally. Now, a fourth element of cognitive affective social state as a proposal is the ability to manage efficient solutions control. That is the governing the selection of efficient mental strategies for the mental task at hand. Now, this assumes some kind of deictic model of just-in-time perceptive integration, such as Ballard et al. Proposed in 1995, and the other neural bases involved in executive function. So, for example, in my English student in my CAS lecture, he will need to make a choice at some point from his task of listening and perhaps note-taking from the lecture board and the PowerPoint that's going on in front of him, and writing that down as a mental strategy, to perhaps an internal, a whole map-making process where he focuses his mental strategy not on iteratively taking down the marks and the cues from the lecturer, but internally reflecting upon what he is learning, how it fits together into his existing mental map, how he can relate it into a whole schema. Now, that choice of switching from the iterative deictic task to the whole map-making, meaning-making task there, that choice of switching is going to involve a set of neural bases here which have been identified in processes like prospection and navigation and goal setting, Sprang 2009, other metacognitive functions in shifting and updating, Miek and Friedman's model of executive function 2000. So we would propose that those neural bases are involved in this CAS management in order to manage the task of handling different structures of data as we engage. And finally, what we might call memory data integration. And this is the process of updating the structure of data request and receipt in response to forming new remote memories. So here's our student who's gone away at the end of the lecture, and he's used to memories of art and literature from his English lectures. That's the principal structure of his remote memory, but as a result of going to this lecture on CAS, he's actually formed some new remote memories around some ideas and models and statistics and abstract ideas here. So his remote memory, as a result of going to this CAS lecture here, has changed in structure. He now has data that's not just structured in this form, but in this more hard, abstract, conceptual, scientific data form as well. So, here's, whilst CAS state in our proposal does not involve the actual activity of forming remote episodic memories, whether they're declarative or sensory or any other form, CAS does not implicate those activities of remote memory formation. CAS does implicate the structure of data request receipt messages, i.e. how we send out messages to the environment to pay attention to the kind of data that's out there. And we do therefore implicate that if the structure of remote memory changes, then the request receipt messages to form new memories is also going to change. So, for example, having gone to this CAS lecture, our English students may now search for hard data as well as soft narrative data. He may pay attention to the world in a slightly different way, to look at theories and ideas and statistics in a way that previously he ignored it. So in other words, his mental search function has shifted, and he is now paying attention to data in the world in a different structure to the one that he was before. Now, CAS is not involved, as I've said, in the formation of remote memories. That's not what it's a theory of, a proposal of, but it is involved in the retrieval of those memories and how the retrieval of those may then structure the integration of new memories. And that would implicate the hippocampus, which we know is involved in memory retrieval, and in prospective memory neural basis involved in things like goal setting, navigation, and prospection. So I've referred to a whole range of neural bases here in these activities which I propose are implicated in this idea of cognitive affective social state, this neural appy that sits between our internal data set and the external data set. So just to recap our model here, the proposal is that we store data in our internal data set, our remote memory here, but the external data set of the environment may well be of a different structure, and I've illustrated that with the story of our student who's an English student who principally has data held in a narrative way in his structure, in his brain, but he's engaged in a lecture where the structure of the data is principally coming in hard, numerical, abstract, statistical forms, and that the task of mentally processing those different structures involves these 5 activities: strain managing, attention bias motivating, memory data integrating, internal external perception switching, and efficient solution control. So a whole range of regions of the brain and neural circuits may be involved in those 5 different activities. No single region is proposed to be involved in managing CAS itself. There certainly is not a CAS region of the brain, but CAS describes a range of neural activities governed by various neural circuits. And in a 2014 paper, I conceptualize CAS as a neural appy that has a set of data gateway states which have the ability to modulate in different environments depending on the learning task. So these data gateway states are modulatable and have the potential to be in different modulated states in order to optimize the task of engaging with the external environment. And as a result of that, CAS, Cognitive Affective Social State, is implicated in this model in the ability to learn. So as we move from environment to environment, from environment 1 to 2 to 3, those different environments offer us data in different structures, and these modulatable data gateways may be potentially adjusted in their state in relation to the demands of the environment. So whilst environment 1 may require those data gateway states to be in this form, paying attention, for example, more to internal rather than external perception, as we move environment, so those states may shift in order to bias attention, to shift our focus and our effort in order to manage the neural task of that environment number 2. And this, of course, means that CAS is a way of describing functions that are closely related to self-regulation and metacognition. And this creates a testable hypothesis. And here's our testable hypothesis, that successful learners might be expected to show a higher ability to adjust their CAS state to fit the learning task in hand than less successful students. In other words, this ability to adjust CAS state may be related to successful learning. That students and learners who are able to adjust their CAS state to fit the learning task in hand may be more successful as learners, and that is a testable hypothesis. So how can we test this hypothesis? Well, first of all, we need to develop a measure that can measure CAS state. That this measure, number 2 here, needs to measure in situ CAS state, i.e. not CAS state just in general, but the CAS state that a person adopts in situ when they're engaging in a specific learning task. And secondly, thirdly, we want to understand more about how this ability to adopt what we might call an optimal CAS state for the learning task in hand relates to constructs such as general intelligence, G, or executive function, EF. Okay, that's the end of this slideshow. There are a set of papers on this website that go into our research into CAS and the development of the concept of CAS in more detail than I can do here. So there are links on this web page to these papers which can be downloaded for those of you who want to take this further. Thank you.